I am Amara Halloway, 29 years old. To the world, I am just a quiet woman who smells of solvents and wood polish, a restorer of old things. To my family, I am a failure. But as I stood there in the grand living room of Halloway Manor, feeling the heat radiate from my cheek, I knew something they did not. I was not just the daughter they were ashamed of. I was their landlord. The air in the living room was suffocating, heavy with the scent of white lilies, an expensive perfume, a nauseating mixture that always reminded me of funeral parlors. And that was fitting because we had buried my father, Marcus Halloway, only 4 hours ago. The guests were still sipping their champagne, whispering in corners about how tragic it was, while my sister Dominique was already calculating the square footage of the inheritance. She threw a stack of legal documents onto the marble coffee table. The papers slid across the cold stone surface and stopped right in front of me. "Sign it, Amara." Dominique repeated, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she used for her social media followers. "Be realistic. You cannot afford the property taxes on a place like this with your little hobby salary. Carter and I are doing you a favor. We will take the burden off your hands." I looked at her. Dominique was beautiful. I could not deny that. She was the perfect image of the Halloway dynasty, draped in black silk that cost more than my car, her makeup flawless even after a funeral. Next to her stood her husband, Carter. He was a tall white man with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He swirled his bourbon glass, looking at the room as if he had already redecorated it in his mind. Amara, Carter said, his voice condescendingly low. "Don't be difficult. Your father would want the estate managed by people who understand finance. People who understand the world. Just sign the transfer." I looked down at the papers. They were asking me to sign over my rights to the Halloway estate for $10. $10. I looked up at my mother. She was sitting on the velvet armchair like a queen on a throne, sipping her drink. "Well," Bernice snapped, "why are you hesitating? Do not embarrass us today, Amara. Your sister needs this house. She has an image to maintain. You have a studio apartment. You do not need 10 bedrooms." I took a deep breath. The sting on my cheek was fading, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "No," I said softly. My voice was steady, surprising even me. Dominique laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Excuse me," she asked. I said no. I repeated louder this time. "I am not signing anything. This house stays as it is." That was when the atmosphere shifted. My mother set her glass down so hard it cracked the coaster. She stood up, her face twisting into a mask of pure fury. "How dare you?" she screamed. "After everything we have done for you, you ungrateful little brat." She rushed toward me. I did not flinch. I did not step back. When her hand connected with my face, I did not cry out. I just stood there, absorbing the blow, letting the shockwave ripple through the room. The guests froze. The music stopped. "You have always been selfish," Bernice spat, pointing a manicured finger in my face. "You were jealous of your sister when you were children, and you are jealous now. But mark my words, Amara. You will sign those papers, or you will never step foot in this family again." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear behind her rage. I saw the desperation. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel small. I felt powerful. Because I knew the truth. To understand why that slap did not break me, you have to understand what happened 48 hours earlier. The memory took me back to the sterile white hallway of Mercy General Hospital. The air there did not smell of lilies. It smelled of antiseptic and approaching death. I had rushed there straight from my workshop, still wearing my canvas overalls, my hands stained with varnish and walnut oil. I had run 3 red lights to get there when the doctor called. But when I reached the door of the ICU, I was blocked. Carter stood in the doorway, his large frame filling the space. He looked me up and down, his nose wrinkling in disgust. "You cannot go in there, Amara," he said, crossing his arms. "Why?" I asked, trying to push past him. "Is he gone? Did I miss him?" Carter did not move. He is resting, he lied. And honestly, look at you. You smell like turpentine and dust. It is not hygienic. Berta, or whatever your mother's name is, said she does not want you upsetting him with your mess. Go clean yourself up. I could hear voices inside. I could hear Dominique's voice. I pushed against Carter's arm. Get out of my way, Carter. He is my father. Carter shoved me back effortlessly. He leaned down, his breath smelling of peppermint and arrogance. Listen to me, you little grease monkey. The family is having a moment. A private moment. You are not part of the aesthetic right now. Go sit in the waiting room like a good girl. Through the small glass window of the door, I saw them. My mother was fixing her hair in a compact mirror, and Dominique was holding her phone up, a ring light clipped to the top of it. She was live streaming. She was live streaming by the deathbed of our father. I saw her pout at the camera, wiping away a fake tear, while my father lay unconscious, hooked up to machines, alone in a room full of people. Hey guys, please pray for the Halloway family. I could hear her muffled voice through the glass. We are just so heartbroken right now. Daddy is fighting so hard. Rage, hot and blinding, filled my chest. They were using his dying moments for content. They were using his tragedy for likes. I pounded on the glass. Let me in, I screamed. Let me in. Carter just smirked and pulled the blinds shut, blocking my view. I collapsed onto the hard plastic chairs of the hallway. I sat there for hours, staring at my stained hands. The nurses looked at me with pity, but they could not interfere with family disputes. I was alone, just as I had always been in this family, but they made a mistake. They thought I was just the dirty little sister who fixed broken chairs. They forgot that my father was the one who taught me how to fix things. And they forgot that 3 years ago, when the banks were threatening to foreclose on the mansion because of my mother's gambling debts, my father had come to me. Not to Dominique, not to Carter. He had come to me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing my father had managed to give me weeks ago before the coma took him. It was a heavy iron key. It was old, rusted, and ugly, just like the things I restored. But it opened something valuable. Back in the present, inside the mansion, I touched my cheek where my mother had slapped me. The burning sensation was a reminder of the hospital door closing in my face. It was a reminder of the blinds being drawn. I looked at Mr. Henderson, the lawyer. He was pale, clutching the file folder to his chest. Tell them, Mr. Henderson, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of the person who pays the bills. Tell my mother whose house she is standing in. Tell my sister who actually owns the roof over her head. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the silent room. He opened the folder. His hands were shaking. Mrs. Halloway, Dominique, he began, his voice cracking. The deed to this estate was transferred 5 years ago. This property does not belong to the estate of Marcus Halloway. Dominique rolled her eyes. What are you talking about? Of course it does. Daddy built this place. It was sold, Mr. Henderson said, looking straight at me. It was sold to a private holding company to settle outstanding debts. Sold, my mother shrieked. To who? Who bought my house? Mr. Henderson took a deep breath. He pointed a shaking finger at me. The holding company is wholly owned by Amara Halloway. She bought the debt. She paid off the mortgage. Amara has owned this house for 5 years. You are all, technically, her guests. I sat on the cold concrete steps of the emergency stairwell, away from the chaos of the intensive care unit. The heavy fire door had clicked shut, cutting off the sound of the medical machines and the performative grief of my family. Here, in the dim light of the humming fluorescent bulbs, I was finally able to breathe. I looked down at my hands. They were still rough, stained with the walnut varnish I had been using earlier that morning. My mother called these hands a disgrace. She said they looked like the hands of a servant. But as I traced the calluses on my palms, I did not feel shame. I felt a connection to the only person in my family who had ever understood me. In the Halloway dynasty, value was measured in appearance. It was measured in how many board members you knew, how many likes you got on a post, and how perfectly you could lie while smiling. My sister Dominique was the masterpiece of this superficial world. She was the golden child, polished and poised, groomed from birth to marry well and spend better. I was the anomaly. I was the quiet one who preferred the smell of sawdust to Chanel No. 5. I was the one who spent her weekends in the basement workshop learning how to stabilize wobbling table legs and bring dull wood back to life. They called me the black sheep. They whispered that I was slow or lacking in ambition simply because I found dignity in labor. They never understood that while they were busy projecting an image of wealth, I was the one learning how to build and preserve the actual substance of it. I unclenched my right fist. Resting in the center of my palm was a heavy iron key. It was old, the metal pitted and cool against my skin. It was not a key that looked like it belonged to a millionaire. It looked like something forgotten, but it was the most important object in the world to me. I closed my eyes and let the memory of 3 weeks ago wash over me. It was the last time my father had been fully lucid before the stroke stole his voice. He had summoned me to his private study, a room my mother rarely entered because she found the smell of old books musty. He had looked so small in his oversized leather chair, his skin gray and papery. He had bypassed my mother. He had bypassed Dominique and her husband Carter. He had waited until the house was empty to speak to me. Amara. He had rasped his voice weak, but his eyes sharp. They are wolves. Your mother, your sister, that husband of hers. They are wolves in designer clothing. They will eat everything I built until there are only bones left. You are the only one who knows how to fix things. You are the only one who understands that a house is not just an asset to leverage, but a legacy to protect. He had pressed this key into my hand then. It was the key to a private safety deposit box that my mother did not know existed. Inside that box was the deed to the estate legally transferred to my name years ago, along with instructions on how to save the family from their own greed. Promise me, he had begged, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. Promise me you will take the burden. They will hate you for it. They will despise you. But you must be the wall that keeps the roof from collapsing on their ungrateful heads. I had promised him. And now, sitting on these dirty stairs, listening to the faint murmur of my sister planning her outfit for the funeral, before he had even taken his last breath, the weight of that promise felt crushing. I squeezed the key until the jagged edges bit into my skin, grounding me. They thought I was weak because I was silent. They thought I was foolish because I was kind. They did not know that the dirty mechanic sitting in the stairwell held the deed to their entire existence in her pocket. I dried my eyes. There were no tears left for them. There was only the work that needed to be done. I stood up, put the key back in my pocket, and prepared to walk back into the wolves' den. The silence that followed the slap did not last long. It was broken by the sound of my mother smoothing down her tweed skirt, composing herself as if she had just swatted a fly rather than assaulted her youngest daughter. She looked around the room, her eyes pleading for validation from the aunts and uncles gathered there. "Look what you made me do," Bernice said, her voice trembling with a performance of victimhood. "I raised you better than this, Amara. I raised you to respect your elders and to honor your family. But you have always been difficult. You have always been the stone in my shoe." She walked back to her armchair and sat down, taking a sip of her drink to calm her nerves. "Do you remember when you were 12?" she asked the room, not waiting for an answer. "We threw a gala for the hospital foundation. Dominique was playing the piano beautifully for the guests. And where was Amara? She was in the garage, covered in grease, trying to fix the gardener's lawnmower. It was humiliating then, and it is humiliating now. You have never understood what it means to be a Halloway. We are leaders. We are icons. We do not work with our hands like common laborers." The room erupted in low murmurs of agreement. I felt the eyes of my extended family boring into me. These were people who claimed to love me at Christmas and Thanksgiving, but who now looked at me with open disdain. I saw Aunt Viola, a woman who wore hats big enough to block out the sun, shaking her head. It is a shame, Viola whispered loudly to Uncle Otis. Marcus worked himself to death for this legacy, and that girl wants to hoard it all for herself. Ungrateful. Uncle Otis nodded, swirling his cognac. It is greed, plain and simple, he grunted. She sees the property value rising and she wants to cash out. She does not care about Dominique. She does not care that her sister is pregnant and needs stability. Pregnant. I looked at Dominique. She was not pregnant. She had been drinking champagne all afternoon. But she rubbed her flat stomach and looked down demurely, playing the part perfectly. They were weaving a narrative right in front of me, painting me as the villain who was stealing a home from a growing family. You are selfish. Amara, my mother, continued, her confidence returning as the room sided with her. You live in that tiny apartment downtown by choice. You have no husband. You have no children. What would you even do with a $9 million estate? Turn it into a workshop for your garbage. This house deserves to be filled with life and success, not sawdust and loneliness. The cruelty of her words was calculated. She knew exactly where to strike. She knew that I wanted a family of my own one day, but that I had prioritized my career and my father's health for the last decade. She was weaponizing my sacrifices against me. Carter stepped forward, then placing a protective hand on Dominique's shoulder. Listen to your mother, Amara, he said, his voice smooth and condescending. We are all just trying to do what is best for the legacy. If you sign the deed over, we can forget this little outburst happened. We can still be a family. We might even let you stay in the guest cottage on weekends. The audacity of it made me almost laugh. They were offering me the guest cottage of my own house. They were offering me scraps from a table that I had built. I looked around the room at the faces of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. They were all nodding, confident in their judgment, secure in their hierarchy. They thought they were shaming me into submission. They thought that by isolating me, by calling me greedy and ungrateful, they could break my will. But they did not know that their words were having the opposite effect. With every insult, with every lie, the bond I felt to them frayed a little more. I realized then that I was not losing a family. I was gaining my freedom. I looked at my mother, who was now smiling triumphantly, thinking she had won. I realized she did not see me as a person. She saw me as an obstacle. And obstacles are meant to be removed. But she forgot that I was a restorer. I knew how to strip away the rot to reveal the truth underneath, and I was about to strip them bare. Carter detached himself from the nod of approval he had just given my mother and sauntered over to where I stood. He moved with the easy, unearned confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He stopped just inches from me, close enough that I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath and the stale linger of cigar smoke clinging to his blazer. He did not yell. He did not raise his hand like my mother. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look comforting to the room, but felt heavy and controlling to me. Look, Amara, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I know they can be intense. Your mother, she is grieving. She gets emotional. But I am a rational man. I am a numbers man, and I am trying to save you from a world of hurt. He squeezed my shoulder, his fingers digging in slightly. You are a smart girl in your own way, he continued, the compliment landing like a slap. You are great with your hands, fixing up old chairs, polishing tables. That is honorable work, honest work. But we are talking about a multi-million-dollar estate here. We are talking about property taxes, liability insurance, complex trust structures. This is not blue-collar work, Amara. This requires a certain pedigree of education that, let us be honest, you just do not possess. I stood rigid, my eyes locked on the silk knot of his tie. I knew exactly what he was saying. He was not just talking about my job. He was talking about my blackness. He was talking about the fact that I worked in a workshop while he worked in a glass tower. He was implying that my brain was not built for the complexities of wealth, that I was destined to be the help, not the master. I have a legal team at Goldberg and Finch in Manhattan. Carter said, his voice hardening just a fraction. They are sharks, Amara. Absolute sharks. If this goes to court, they will bury you in paperwork. They will drag out your medical history, your financial records, every parking ticket you have ever had. They will paint you as incompetent, unstable, and unfit to manage this legacy. Do you have the cash reserves to fight a legal battle against a top-tier firm? Or will you bankrupt yourself just to prove a point? He leaned in closer, his lips brushing my ear. Do yourself a favor. Sign the papers. Take the guest cottage access. Go back to your workshop and let the adults handle the business. I am offering you a life raft. Do not be stupid enough to drown just because you are too proud to grab it. His words were designed to make me feel small, to make me feel like a child playing dress-up in her father's house. He wanted me to believe that power was something that belonged to men like him, men with the right connections and the right skin tone. But as he pulled back and gave me a smug, pitying smile, he made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was intimidated. He assumed that because I worked with my hands, my mind was simple. He did not know that the very lawyers he was bragging about, the firm of Goldberg and Finch, had been the ones to draft the purchase agreement for me 5 years ago. He was threatening me with my own employees. I did not give them the satisfaction of a single tear. In that moment, the little girl who had spent 29 years begging for a seat at their table finally died. And in her place, the businesswoman who held the deed to the table, the chairs, and the roof above them was born. I took a slow, deliberate breath, inhaling the scent of the lilies one last time. I reached up and adjusted the collar of my jacket, brushing off an imaginary speck of dust from my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it was a declaration of war. I was cleaning their toxicity off me. I looked at Carter, who was still wearing that smug, self-satisfied grin. I looked at Dominique, who was checking her reflection in her spoon. And finally, I locked eyes with my mother. She was waiting for me to apologize. She was waiting for me to kneel. "You hit me because I would not sign," I said, my voice slicing through the silence like a diamond cutter. I spoke clearly, ensuring that every aunt, uncle, and cousin in the room heard every syllable. "You chose violence because you have no other leverage." My mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "I disciplined you, Amara. There is a difference. Now stop being dramatic and sign the papers so we can eat." I picked up my purse from the floor. "I am leaving Bernice," I said, using her first name for the first time in my life. The shock on her face was almost comical. "You are walking out?" she asked incredulously. "You are walking out on your father's funeral." "I am walking out on you," I corrected. "And as for the house, do not worry. I will not argue with you any more today. But I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember the feeling of your hand striking my face, because that slap just cost you more than you can possibly imagine. It was the most expensive temper tantrum you have ever thrown." I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I did not run. I walked with the rhythm of someone who owns the ground beneath her feet. I could feel the eyes of the guests on my back. Some of them looked confused, shifting uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something fundamental had just shifted. They saw a confidence in my stride that did not match the narrative of the defeated daughter. But as I reached the door, I heard it. Laughter. It started with Carter, a low chuckle, and was quickly joined by Dominique and my mother. "She will be back," my mother announced loudly to the room, performing for her audience. "She just needs to cool off. She has nowhere else to go. She will come crawling back when she runs out of money for that little apartment of hers. Let her have her dramatic exit." I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped out into the crisp, cool air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn that I paid to maintain. As the door clicked shut behind me, muffling their laughter, I pulled my car keys from my pocket. They thought they had won. They thought they had shamed me into submission. They had no idea that they had just evicted themselves. I got into my car, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and saw a red mark fading on my cheek. I started the engine. The morning was over. The eviction process would start tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. The office of Henderson and Associates was designed to intimidate. From the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes to the panoramic view of the city skyline, every inch of the room screamed power and prestige. It was the kind of place where fortunes were made and lives were ruined with the stroke of a pen. My mother Bernice and my sister Dominique fit right in, or at least they thought they did. They had arrived 20 minutes late, making a grand entrance, as if they were walking the red carpet at a movie premiere, rather than attending a legal proceeding. Bernice was wearing a black dress that was far too tight and a wide-brimmed hat with a veil that looked like something out of a soap opera. She had even hired a professional makeup artist that morning. Dominique was draped in furs despite the mild weather, her fingers weighed down by every piece of jewelry she could find in her jewelry box. They were vibrating with excitement. They were not mourning a husband and a father. They were celebrating a lottery win. They were already spending the money in their heads, booking vacations to the Maldives and looking at catalogs for luxury yachts. I sat in the corner of the room in a simple gray chair, away from the massive oak desk. I was wearing a plain white blouse and black trousers, my hair pulled back in a practical bun. To them, I was invisible. I was just a ghost haunting their celebration. They did not even look at me when they walked in. They did not ask how I was coping. To them, I was just a necessary annoyance, a signature they needed to collect before they could cash their checks. Bernice kicked her feet up onto the rung of the chair and turned to Dominique. "I think I will buy a new Mercedes first," she announced loud enough for the secretary outside to hear. "The S-Class. Black on black. I deserve it, after putting up with your father's moods for 30 years. Dominique nodded, scrolling through her phone. "I am thinking of investing in a vineyard," she said. "Carter says it is a great tax write-off. Plus, imagine the branding opportunities. Dominique Estates. It has a ring to it." They giggled, clinking their water glasses as if they were flutes of champagne. They were so loud, so confident, so utterly delusional. They did not notice that Mr. Henderson, the senior partner of the firm, was not smiling. He was sitting behind his desk, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He looked like a man who was about to stand in front of a firing squad. He kept glancing at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. He knew what was in the file sitting in front of him. He knew that the two peacocks preening in front of his desk were about to have their feathers plucked. I crossed my legs and folded my hands in my lap. I watched them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a failed experiment. They were so sure of their place in the world. They were so sure that biology equaled inheritance. They had spent their entire lives relying on the Halloway name to open doors for them, never realizing that the name was just letters on a page. The real power was in the work, and while they had been buying hats and planting vineyards, I had been working. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the cavernous room. Bernice and Dominique stopped talking and looked at him, expecting him to hand them the keys to the kingdom. Instead, he opened the folder with a heavy sigh. The show was about to begin. Mr. Henderson picked up the document. His hands were shaking slightly, not because of age, but because of the explosion he knew was coming. He looked over the rim of his glasses at Bernice and Dominique. They were leaning forward like hungry wolves waiting for a piece of meat. The room was silent save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. "I, Marcus Halloway, being of sound mind and body," Mr. Henderson read, his voice steady but strained, "hereby distribute my assets as follows. To my wife Bernice and my daughter Dominique, I leave my liquid assets." Dominique squeezed her mother's hand, a greedy smile spreading across her face. "Which total $0, Mr. Henderson continued without pausing. The smile froze on Dominique's face. Bernice dropped her handbag. "Excuse me," Bernice scoffed. "You must have skipped a page. Read the part about the stocks. Read the part about the offshore accounts." Mr. Henderson looked up. "There are no stocks, Mrs. Halloway. There are no offshore accounts. Furthermore, I leave the outstanding balance of $450,000 on the American Express Centurion card solely to my wife Bernice Halloway, as this debt was accrued entirely by her personal expenditures." For a second, There was absolute silence. Then chaos erupted. Dominique stood up so fast her chair toppled over with a loud crash. She grabbed a crystal paperweight from the edge of the desk and hurled it at the bookshelf. It shattered against the leather spines of the law books. "You represent a liar," she screamed, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "You forged this. Daddy was a millionaire. He was a tycoon. Do not sit there and tell me he left us nothing but debt." "I am telling you the truth," Dominique. Mr. Henderson said, his voice rising to match hers. "Your father was bankrupt 5 years ago." "Liar," Bernice hissed, standing up to join her daughter. "We went to Paris last spring. We bought a new Range Rover in December. Bankrupt men do not live like that. Bankrupt men do live like that when they are trying to keep their wife and daughter from leaving them." Mr. Henderson snapped, losing his patience. He drained his retirement fund to pay for that trip to Paris. Bernice. He took out predatory loans to pay for that Range Rover. He spent the last 5 years of his life drowning in interest payments just to keep up the appearance of wealth that you two demanded. Dominique was pacing the small office, now pulling at her hair. "This is impossible," she muttered. "This is a joke. I have ordered a Tesla. It is being delivered next week. Who is going to pay for it?" Mr. Henderson closed the folder. "Nobody is going to pay for it, Dominique, because there is no money. The well is dry. In fact, it has been dry for half a decade. Marcus died penniless trying to sustain an image for social media that neither of you earned." "You are lying," Bernice screamed, slamming her hands on the desk. "I will sue you. I will have your license. I want to see the real will, the one where he leaves us the millions we deserve." "There is no other will," Mr. Henderson said quietly, looking at them with a mixture of pity and disgust. "The only thing Marcus had left to give you was the truth. And frankly, he was too afraid to give you even that while he was alive." The initial shock of the empty bank accounts seemed to wear off, only to be replaced by a darker, more focused anger. Carter did not sit back down. Instead, he turned his gaze slowly toward me. It was the look of a predator realizing that if there was no fresh meat on the table, he would have to hunt for it. He walked around Mr. Henderson's desk, ignoring the lawyer completely, and stopped right in front of my chair. His shadow fell over me, blocking out the light from the window. "I know what happened here," Carter said, his voice low and dangerous. He looked at Bernice and Dominique and then pointed a finger directly at my face. "This is not about bankruptcy. This is about theft. Your father did not lose that money. She stole it." Bernice gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "Amara," she whispered, "how could you?" Carter laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He leaned down until his face was level with mine. "You are cleverer than you look, Amara. I will give you that. You must have gotten to him when the dementia started setting in. You must have slipped some papers in front of him when he was confused, telling him it was for medical bills or insurance. And he signed them because he trusted you. He trusted the quiet little mouse in the corner." Mr. Henderson stood up. "Mr. Wilson, that is a serious accusation and entirely untrue." "Shut up," Carter snapped without looking at him. "I am talking to her." He looked me up and down, his eyes filled with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "Look at you. You are a fraud. You sit there in your discount rack clothes pretending to be innocent. But we know the truth. You do not have the brain for high finance, Amara. You never did." He straightened up, addressing the room like a prosecutor making a closing argument. "Let us be realistic, everyone. Amara is a furniture fixer. That is what she does. She spends her days in a dark basement stripping varnish off old chairs and breathing in sawdust. She inhales chemical fumes for a living. What does a woman like that know about asset management? What does she know about trusts or tax shelters or equity? Nothing. She is a blue-collar worker, trying to play a white-collar game." Dominique chimed in, eager to find a villain for her misfortune. "He is right, Mom. Remember when she tried to explain her business to us at Thanksgiving? She was talking about wood grain and humidity levels. It was pathetic. She barely has a high school understanding of economics. How could she possibly manage an estate this size unless she tricked Daddy into giving it to her?" Carter nodded, fueling the fire. "Exactly. It is elder abuse. That is what it is. You took advantage of a sick, dying man because you were jealous of your sister's success. You knew you would never amount to anything on your own, so you decided to steal what belongs to the people who actually know how to use it. He leaned back in again, his voice dripping with venom. You are out of your depth, Amara. You are a manual laborer. You are the help. And once I get my forensic accountants on this, we are going to prove that you coerced him. We are going to send you to prison, and while you are rotting in a cell, I will be living in that house. So why do not you save us all the trouble and confess right now? Tell us where you hid the money. The room fell silent, waiting for my defense. They expected me to cry. They expected me to scream that I was innocent. They expected the old Amara, the one who stuttered when she was yelled at. But that Amara was gone. I looked up at Carter. I looked at his red, flushed face and the vein throbbing in his neck. I looked at his expensive suit, which I now knew was likely bought on credit. And then I did the one thing that I knew would unsettle him more than any scream. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a cold, slow curving of my lips. It was the smile of a chess master watching an opponent move their queen directly into a trap. I did not say a word. I just held his gaze, my eyes dancing with a secret that would destroy him. My silence filled the room louder than his shouting. It was a mirror reflecting his own insecurity back at him, and for the first time since he started yelling, I saw a flicker of doubt in Carter's eyes. He realized that the furniture fixer was not afraid of him, and that terrified him. Mr. Henderson looked at me over the rim of his glasses. His eyes were asking a silent question. Do you want to tell them, or should I? I gave him a barely perceptible shake of my head. Not yet. Let them scream a little longer. Let them dig the hole a little deeper. I turned my gaze back to Carter, who was still panting from his tirade about my lack of education. He called me a manual laborer. He called me a furniture fixer. It was amusing, really, how small their world was. To them, wood was just material. To me, it was history. They saw me in coveralls covered in dust, and they assumed I was poor. They did not know that the dust on my clothes last week was from a 17th-century French armoire that belonged to Marie Antoinette. They did not know that the varnish under my fingernails was a proprietary blend I developed to restore the original desk of a founding father. I am a master conservator. My name is whispered with reverence in the halls of the Smithsonian and the archives of the Vatican. I do not just fix chairs, Carter. I save history, and history pays very well. My mind drifted back to 5 years ago. I remembered the day my father came to my studio. He was not the proud patriarch then. He was a broken man. He sat on a stool amidst my solvents and tools and wept. He told me about the bad investments. He told me about my mother's spending that was bleeding him dry. He told me the bank was foreclosing on Halloway Manor in 30 days. He was terrified, not of being poor but of the shame. He was terrified that Bernice and Dominique would find out he was a failure. That was the same year I landed the contract for the Library of Congress restoration project. It was a $50 million initiative to preserve the nation's most fragile documents and artifacts. As the lead conservator, my fee was substantial, enough to buy a private island, or in this case, enough to save a sinking ship. I remembered writing the check. I remembered setting up the blind trust. I bought the debt from the bank entirely. I paid off the mortgage. I paid the back taxes. I became the owner of Halloway Manor, not to control them but to protect them. I let my father keep the title of owner in name only so he could keep his dignity. I let my mother keep her dinner parties so she could keep her pride. I let them live in my house, rent-free for half a decade, while they treated me like a servant in the home I paid for. I looked around the room now. I looked at the crystal chandelier that I had paid to have rewired last year. I looked at the silk drapes that I had replaced when the sun rotted the old ones. I looked at the very floorboards they were standing on. They were standing in my house, breathing my air and insulting my intelligence. Carter was still talking, his voice a drone of arrogance. He was threatening to bring in forensic accountants. I almost laughed out loud. Go ahead, Carter, bring them in. Let them look at the books. They will not find fraud. They will find a daughter who loved her father enough to cover his mistakes. They will find a woman who works with her hands because she loves the craft, not because she needs the money. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again, cutting through Carter's speech. He looked at me, and I gave him a nod. It was time. The internal monologue was over. It was time to introduce them to their landlord. The drive back to Halloway Manor was suffocating. The silence in the limousine was thick enough to choke unbroken only by the sharp tapping of my sister Dominique's acrylic nails against the glass window. When the car finally rolled to a stop in front of the limestone steps of the estate, I thought perhaps the reality of their financial destitution would humble them. I thought realizing they had been living on my charity for 5 years might spark a moment of gratitude or at least shame. I was wrong. Narcissists do not feel shame. They only feel rage when their delusions are challenged. My mother Bernice did not wait for the chauffeur to open her door. She shoved it open and marched up the stairs, her heels clicking furiously against the stone. She threw the double doors open and stormed into the grand foyer, hurling her alligator skin handbag onto an antique console table that was worth more than her entire wardrobe. "Fix it," she screamed, spinning around to face me. I stood in the doorway, calm and unmoving. "Fix what, Bernice?" "Fix this mess," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "I do not care what that lawyer said. I do not care about blind trusts or mortgages or debt. You humiliated us today, Amara. You made us look like paupers in front of a stranger. You made your sister cry." Dominique walked in behind me, wiping away dry tears. "Carter's parents are coming for Easter," she sniffed. "They think this is my inheritance. They think I am an heiress. If they find out I am penniless and living in my little sister's charity housing, they will laugh at me. Carter will be humiliated." I looked at them both, stunned by the sheer magnitude of their entitlement. "So let me understand this," I said, my voice quiet but hard. "I spent millions of dollars to save this house from foreclosure so you would not be homeless. I paid off Dad's debts. I let you live here rent-free. And your biggest concern is that you might look bad in front of your in-laws." Bernice walked up to me, her face inches from mine. "Listen to me very closely, you ungrateful girl. In this family, we do not have individual assets. We have family resources. And as the head of this family, I decide how those resources are allocated. You are single. You are alone. You spend your life in a basement fixing broken chairs. You do not need a 10-bedroom mansion. Dominique is building a family. She is building a dynasty with Carter. She needs this estate to maintain the Halloway image." She took a breath, her eyes narrowing. "It does not matter that your name is on the deed, Amara. You are my daughter. I gave birth to you, I own you, and by extension, I own what you have. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to go back to that lawyer tomorrow. You are going to figure out a legal loophole to transfer the deed to Dominique as a gift. You will tell everyone it was a clerical error, and you will do it with a smile." "And if I refuse?" I asked. Bernice smiled, a cold, cruel curving of her lips that made my blood run cold. "Then you are no daughter of mine. I will turn this entire community against you. I will tell everyone you stole your father's money while he was dying. I will make you a pariah in this town. You will be alone, Amara, truly alone. So be a good girl. Be the dutiful daughter I raised. Sacrifice for your sister. It is the only thing you are good for." She turned her back on me, dismissing me like a servant. "Go to your room and think about it. And do not come down for dinner unless you have a pen in your hand, ready to sign." I watched her walk away, her head held high in the house she did not own, walking on floors she could not afford. She thought she had given me an ultimatum. She thought she had trapped me. She did not realize she had just given me the permission I needed to burn the bridge completely. The silence that stretched between us in the grand foyer was pulled tight enough to snap. My mother Bernice stood there with her chest heaving, waiting for my submission. She expected the trembling girl who used to hide in the pantry to avoid conflict. She expected the daughter who sought approval like a flower seeks the sun. But that daughter had died the moment her hand struck my face earlier that day. Standing in her place was the CEO of Heritage Real Estate, and I was done negotiating. I am not signing anything. Bernice, I said, my voice low and steady, and I am not asking for your permission to stay in the guest room. I am informing you that you are currently standing on my property, and if you continue to disrespect me, I will have to reconsider your living arrangements. That broke her. The reality I was presenting was so incompatible with her delusion of power that her mind simply rejected it. She let out a sound that was half scream and half growl, a feral noise that echoed off the high ceilings. You are the owner, she screeched, her eyes bulging. You own nothing. I gave birth to you. I made you. In this house I am the only authority. I am the matriarch. This is my kingdom, and I will not be usurped by a child who smells like varnish and disappointment. She did not just yell. She lunged. With a strength fueled by pure adrenaline, she grabbed the handle of my vintage leather overnight bag, which was sitting by the foot of the stairs. She dragged it across the marble floor, her heels skidding as she hauled it toward the massive double doors. She threw them open to the night air, and with a grunt of exertion she heaved my bag out onto the gravel driveway. I heard the sickening crunch of my belongings hitting the ground. I knew my laptop was in there. I knew my sketches were in there, but I did not move to stop her. "Get out!" she screamed, pointing into the darkness. "Get out before I call the police. I know the chief. He will believe a grieving widow over a greedy spinster. I will tell them you attacked me. I will tell them you are unstable." I looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair was coming undone from its pins. Her makeup was smeared. She looked deranged. I realized then that logic had left the building. There was no reasoning with a narcissist who felt their control slipping away. If I stayed, the violence would escalate. She was baiting me. She wanted me to push her so she could play the victim. She wanted a physical altercation so she could call the police and paint me as the aggressor just as she threatened. I would not give her that ammunition. I stepped out onto the porch, the cool night air hitting my face. I walked past her without a word. I walked down the steps to where my bag lay in the dirt. I picked it up, dusting off the gravel. "You are making a mistake, Bernice," I said, not looking back. "I am teaching you a lesson," she yelled from the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm light of the chandelier. "Do not come back until you are ready to sign that deed. You are banished. Amara banished." She slammed the heavy oak doors shut. The sound was final. I heard the heavy deadbolt slide into place. I stood there alone in the dark driveway of the estate I had paid for, looking up at the windows of the home I had saved. They thought they had won. They thought they had thrown out the trash. They did not know that they had just locked themselves inside a cage, and I held the only key. I walked to my car, my heart pounding not with fear, but with the cold clarity of a general planning a siege. I would leave tonight, but tomorrow the locks would change, and the eviction notice would be served. I was not there when the violation of my home began. I was sitting in a motel room 3 miles away watching the live feed from the security cameras on my laptop screen. The irony was suffocating. My mother had banished me from the home I owned, and now I was watching her break into it like a common criminal. It was 11 o'clock at night when the black SUV pulled up to the iron gates. Carter stepped out first, followed by a man in blue coveralls carrying a heavy tool bag. I watched in silence as Carter argued with the locksmith, pointing aggressively at the keypad. I could almost hear his lies through the screen. He was likely telling the man that he was the owner, that his wife had lost her keys, that this was just a misunderstanding. The locksmith looked hesitant, but money talks, and Carter likely flashed enough cash to silence any ethical concerns. The drill whirred against the lock of the pedestrian gate, and moments later the heavy iron swung open. They did not walk up the driveway, they swarmed. Carter, Bernice, and Dominique moved with the frantic energy of looters during a blackout. They reached the front door and the drilling began again. When the heavy oak doors finally groaned open, my mother stepped across the threshold not with reverence, but with a terrifying sense of ownership. She threw her arms wide, spinning in the center of the foyer, her laughter echoing off the marble walls. Finally, she shouted, her voice distorted by the microphone on the camera. "The witch is gone. The house is ours again." They did not take off their shoes. They tracked mud and gravel across the Persian rugs I had spent months restoring. They moved through the house like a virus, infecting every room they touched. Dominique went straight for the living room, running her hands over the antique vases, not to admire them, but to assess their value. She picked up a Ming Dynasty porcelain bowl, turning it over to look for a price tag. "This is ugly," she sneered, setting it back down with a careless clatter that made me flinch in my motel room. "We should sell it. We can get something modern, something white and gold." But the worst violation happened in my father's study. This was a room that had been his sanctuary, a place of quiet reflection and history. Carter kicked the door open. He strode over to the wine cabinet, where my father kept his most prized vintage bottles intended for weddings and momentous occasions. Carter grabbed a bottle of 1982 Bordeaux, a bottle my father had saved for 20 years. He did not look for a corkscrew. He did not look for a crystal glass. He used a pocket knife to hack at the cork, shredding it into the wine. He took a swig straight from the bottle, red wine dripping down his chin and staining his expensive white shirt. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and let out a loud belch. To the victors, he announced, raising the bottle to Bernice and Dominique, who had joined him. "To taking back what is ours." Bernice grabbed a crystal decanter from the shelf and poured herself a drink, spilling amber liquid over the leather blotter on the desk. "This is how we were meant to live," she sighed, leaning back in my father's chair, putting her muddy heels up on his desk. "No more budget talks, no more pinching pennies. We are Halloways. We deserve the best." They laughed, passing the bottle around, getting drunk on theft and delusion. They opened drawers, dumping my father's papers onto the floor, searching for cash or jewelry. They tore through the room with zero respect for the man who had built the roof over their heads. Watching them, I realized they were not grieving. They were feasting. They were vultures picking at a carcass, and they had no idea that the carcass was actually a trap waiting to snap shut. I closed my laptop. I had seen enough. The footage was saved. The evidence was secured. They wanted to play house in my home. I would let them, because the more comfortable they got, the more painful the eviction would be. The security feed switched to the north drawing room and my breath caught in my throat. This was not just a room in the house. This was my sanctuary. It was where I kept the pieces that were mid-restoration, the fragile artifacts that required climate control and a delicate touch. It was where I had spent thousands of hours bringing history back to life. But to my sister Dominique, it was just a cluttered room that smelled of old wood and varnish. She stood in the center of the room with her hands on her hips, looking at a 17th century French writing desk I had been meticulously restoring for 6 months. It was a masterpiece of marquetry featuring hand-cut inlays of rosewood and mother of pearl. It was worth more than the luxury car she drove. "Get rid of it!" Dominique commanded, waving her hand dismissively at the movers Carter had hired. One of the movers, a burly man in a stained shirt, looked at the desk hesitantly. "Are you sure, ma'am?" he asked. "This looks real old. It looks like an antique." "It is trash," Dominique snapped, rolling her eyes. "Look at it. It is scratched. The wood is dark and depressing. I want this room cleared out completely. I am turning this into my content creation studio. I need white walls. I need ring lights. I need space. All of this brown junk is ruining my aesthetic. Get it out of here. Now." I watched in silent agony as the two men grabbed the desk. They did not lift it by the frame as I would have done. They grabbed it by the delicate legs. I wanted to scream through the screen. I wanted to reach through the monitor and stop them. I watched as they awkwardly maneuvered the heavy piece toward the French doors that led to the garden. "Watch the wall!" Dominique yelled, not out of concern for the desk, but for the paint. They reached the threshold. The door was not fully open. Instead of setting it down and adjusting, one of the men shoved the desk forward. There was a sickening crack that the microphone picked up with devastating clarity. One of the cabriolet legs snapped clean off. The desk lurched sideways, and the movers lost their grip. It crashed onto the stone patio outside, splintering the delicate inlay work that I had spent weeks repairing with tweezers and a magnifying glass. "Oops," Dominique laughed, covering her mouth. "Well, it was garbage anyway. Just leave it there. The gardeners can chop it up for firewood later." Tears finally pricked my eyes. It was not just wood and glue. That desk had survived revolutions. It had survived wars. It had been passed down through generations only to be destroyed by a woman whose only contribution to the world was makeup tutorials and vanity. She did not just break a desk. She was breaking the soul of the house. She was erasing the history that gave the Halloway name its weight, replacing it with the hollow plastic culture she worshipped. Next, she pointed to a set of velvet armchairs that belonged to our great-grandmother. "Those too," she said. "They smell like old people. Throw them on the lawn." The movers obliged, dragging the velvet through the dirt and tossing them onto the damp grass like bags of refuse. I watched as the night dew began to settle on the silk upholstery, ruining fabrics that were no longer manufactured. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a profound sorrow. They were destroying value they could not comprehend. They were burning money they did not have. And as I watched my sister take a selfie in front of the empty room, captioning it, "Out with the old, in with the new," I realized that she was right. She was clearing out the old. But she had no idea that by destroying my work, she was ensuring that when the eviction came, she would have absolutely nothing of value left to sell. She was bankrupting herself one antique at a time, and she was too stupid to even realize it. The transformation of Halloway Manor from a solemn place of mourning into a chaotic nightclub happened with terrifying speed. By midnight, the driveway was filled with luxury cars that did not belong to us, and the heavy oak doors were thrown wide open to the night air. From my vantage point, watching the security feed, I could see that the house was vibrating. The bass from the massive speakers they had dragged into the great hall was so loud it was shaking the crystals on the chandeliers. They had invited everyone they knew. It was an impromptu gala, a victory lap for a race they had not actually won. Bernice was holding court in the center of the foyer. She had changed into a gold-sequined dress she must have brought with her, and she was holding a glass of champagne in one hand and a cigarette in the other. She was ashing directly onto the floor. I watched her greet guests with a manic energy, hugging people she barely knew and gesturing grandly at the staircase. Finally, she shouted over the music, her voice slurring slightly. "Finally, the house is back in the hands of people who know how to enjoy life. My late husband was so boring, God rest his soul. He treated this place like a museum. But we are going to bring the party back to the Halloway name." The guests laughed and cheered, raising their glasses. They were vultures just like her, attracted to the smell of free liquor and perceived power. They moved through the house like a swarm of locusts, touching everything, judging everything. But the most painful moment came in the drawing room. Carter had opened my father's humidors and was handing out rare Cuban cigars to his friends like they were candy. Men were smoking inside the house, blowing thick clouds of gray smoke into the silk tapestries that I had spent years preserving. And then there was the rug. It was a Tabriz carpet from the 18th century, woven with silk and wool, a masterpiece of Persian artistry that my father had bought at an auction in London 30 years ago. It was the centerpiece of the room. Dominique was standing right in the middle of it, holding a full bottle of Merlot. She was spinning around, trying to get the perfect angle for a video for her followers. "This is my new living room, guys," she shouted into her phone. "We are going to rip all this old stuff out and put in white marble floors. It is going to be so chic." She spun too fast. She lost her balance in her high heels and stumbled. The bottle flew from her hand. I watched in slow motion on the screen as the dark red liquid exploded across the ivory and blue patterns of the antique rug. It soaked into the fibers, immediately spreading like a gunshot wound across the history woven into the wool. A hush fell over the group standing near her. One of her friends gasped. "Oh my God, Dominique, that looks expensive." Dominique just laughed. She kicked at the stain with her heel, grinding the wine deeper into the fabric. "Who cares?" she said, waving her hand. "It is old and dusty anyway. I told you we are gutting this place. Consider it the first step in the renovation." The group laughed with her. Carter walked over and poured more wine onto the spot, making a joke about pouring one out for the old aesthetic. They were not just damaging property. They were desecrating a memory. They were dancing on the grave of the man who built this fortune, and they were doing it with a smile. I felt a cold knot of rage tighten in my stomach. That rug was worth more than Carter's annual salary. And tomorrow, when the police arrived and the eviction notice was served, that stain would be item number 1 on the bill of damages. They were partying like royalty, but they were racking up a tab that would bankrupt them for the rest of their lives. The police cruiser lights cut through the darkness, painting the limestone facade of Halloway Manor in flashing strokes of red and blue. It was 1 in the morning. I sat in the passenger seat watching the house I had saved from ruin pulsing with the base of a party that was destroying it. Beside me sat Sheriff Miller. He was a man of few words with graying temples and eyes that had seen everything this town had to offer. He had been my father's fishing buddy for 20 years. He knew the man Marcus Halloway was, and he respected him. That was the only reason he had agreed to escort me personally instead of sending a rookie. "Ready, Amara?" He asked, his voice gravelly and calm. I nodded. "I am ready." We stepped out of the car. The music was so loud it vibrated in my chest. We walked up the front steps past a discarded champagne bottle lying in the flower bed. I rang the doorbell long and hard. Inside, the music cut off abruptly. There was a shuffling of feet, a hushed whisper, and then the heavy door swung open. My mother stood there. She was wearing the gold-sequined dress I had seen on the security feed, but now it looked garish under the porch lights. Her eyes were glassy, and her lipstick was smeared. For a split second, she looked terrified seeing the uniform. But then her survival instinct kicked in, and she transformed. Bernice Halloway threw her hands up to her face and let out a wail that could shatter glass. "Oh, thank God you are here, Sheriff!" she cried, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "Please help me. My daughter is trying to kill me." She collapsed against the doorframe, clutching her chest, her breathing ragged and theatrical. "Look at her," she sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is a monster. She is trying to throw her own mother out on the street in the middle of the night. We are grieving. We just buried my husband today and she is harassing us. She is abusing us." She looked up at Sheriff Miller with wide, pleading eyes. "Arrest her, Sheriff. Please. She is mentally unstable. She has been threatening us all night. She wants to take the house. She wants to leave me homeless. Who does that to a widow? Who does that to their own mother?" I stood there watching the performance with cold detachment. It was impressive in a grotesque way. She was playing the victim perfectly, weaponizing her tears and her age. She was banking on the fact that the world naturally sides with the mother. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to scream back so she could say, "See, she is crazy." But I remained silent. Sheriff Miller did not reach for his handcuffs. He did not comfort her. He simply adjusted his belt and looked down at her with a flat, unamused expression. He had known Bernice for 30 years, too. He knew exactly who she was. "Cut the act." "Bernice," he said, his voice stern. My mother's wailing stopped instantly. She blinked, looking confused. "Excuse me?" she sniffed. "I said cut the act," the sheriff repeated. "I am not here to arrest your daughter. I am here because the legal owner of this property asked for a civil standby to inspect for damages. And judging by the noise ordinance violation I heard from down the street, She has every right to be concerned. Owner Bernice hissed, dropping the facade entirely. Her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. She is not the owner. She is a thief. She tricked Marcus. This is my house. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, forcing her to take a step back into the foyer. I have seen the deed, Bernice. It is in her name. It has been for 5 years. Now step aside and let us in, or I will have to cite you for obstruction. Bernice glared at him and then at me. The hatred in her eyes was a physical weight. She realized her tears were useless here. She realized she had lost the audience. Fine, she spat, stepping aside and gesturing grandly at the hallway filled with silent watching guests. Come in, inspect your precious house, but you will not find anything. We are just celebrating a great man's life. Unlike you, Amara, we actually loved him. I walked past her, not saying a word. I did not need to speak. The wine stain on the rug and the broken furniture were about to do all the talking for me. Carter stepped between the sheriff and his wife. He raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender, but his eyes were hard and calculating. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had not spent years dodging loan sharks without learning how to manipulate the legal system. Officer, wait a minute, he said, his voice smooth and practiced. You cannot remove us from this property. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. Sheriff Miller frowned, his hand resting on his belt. You broke into a house you do not own, son. That is breaking and entering. That is criminal. Is it? Carter asked, tilting his head. My mother-in-law, Bernice, has lived here for 30 years. She has never been formally evicted. There is no court order mandating her removal. She invited us in. We are her guests. And since she has established residency and we are her family, you cannot just throw us out into the street without due process. That would be an illegal eviction. You would open the department up to a massive lawsuit. I watched as the sheriff hesitated. Carter was lying about the morality of the situation, but he was technically right about the bureaucracy. The law was designed to protect tenants from slumlords, but men like Carter used it as a shield for their entitlement. He was exploiting the gray area of domestic disputes where police officers are terrified of overstepping their bounds. Carter pulled out his phone. In fact, he continued a smirk playing on his lips. We are contesting the validity of that deed. We believe Amara coerced a mentally incompetent man into signing it. Until a judge rules on the ownership, this house is in probate limbo. If you remove us, you are taking sides in a civil lawsuit. Are you prepared to explain that to your captain tomorrow morning? Sheriff Miller looked at me. The frustration was etched deep into the lines of his face. He hated them. I could see it. But he was a man of the law, and the law was currently being twisted into a knot by a man who had no respect for it. He sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. Amara, he said quietly, turning his back to Carter. He has got me in a corner. If I drag them out now and they claim residency or a contested title, the department gets sued. I need a judge to sign an eviction order. I need a piece of paper that says get out in black and white. Without it, my hands are tied. I looked past him to where Bernice and Dominique were standing. They were clutching each other, grinning like schoolgirls who had just gotten away with cheating on a test. They thought they had won a great victory. They thought they had outsmarted the system. So, they get to stay? I asked, my voice flat. After breaking my lock. After destroying my property. Just for tonight, Miller said, apologizing with his eyes. Get to the courthouse when it opens at 9. Get an emergency order. Then call me. I will come back and I will drag them out by their ankles if I have to. But right now I cannot touch them. Carter poured himself another glass of wine, raising it in a toast to the sheriff. Smart move, officer, he said. Now, if you do not mind, we have a party to finish. Please close the door on your way out. I felt a fire burning in my chest, hotter than it had ever burned before. But I did not scream. I did not fight. I nodded at the sheriff. Let us go, I said. We walked back out into the cool night air, leaving the sound of their laughter behind us. They thought the law protected them. They did not realize that by forcing me to go to court, they were forcing me to make their humiliation a matter of public record. They wanted a legal battle. I would give them a war. Sheriff Miller shifted his weight uncomfortably, waiting for the explosion. He braced himself for the screaming match he was sure would follow. He expected me to demand justice, to pound on the door until my knuckles bled, or to beg him to reconsider. In his 20 years of policing, he had seen family disputes turn violent over much less than a $9 million estate. He watched me expecting the hysterical daughter my mother had painted me to be. But the explosion never came. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. It was the icy clarity of a surgeon realizing the patient is too far gone to save, and the only option left is amputation. I looked past the sheriff at the glowing windows of the manor. I could see the silhouettes of my family and their sycophants dancing. I could see Carter raising a bottle in a toast, likely mocking the fact that the police were leaving. They looked so happy. They looked so victorious. They were drunk on power, unaware that the alcohol they were consuming was effectively poison to their future. "It is fine, Sheriff," I said, my voice soft, but devoid of any warmth. Miller blinked, surprised. "I am sorry, Amara. I really am. If you want, I can stay here and try to mediate." "No," I interrupted, turning my gaze back to him. "Do not disturb them. Let them stay." He looked confused. "You want them to stay? After everything they destroyed?" "I want them to get comfortable," I said, a small cold smile touching my lips. "I want them to open every bottle of wine. I want them to feel like they have won completely. Because if you drag them out now, they will play the victims. They will say I ruined their grieving process. But if we let them stay tonight, they will destroy themselves." I looked back at the house where the bass was still thumping against the historic walls. "Let them enjoy it," I whispered. "Let them feast. Because this is the last meal of the condemned. I want them to enjoy the last party they will ever attend as members of high society. By tomorrow morning, they will not be Halloways anymore. They will be defendants." Miller looked at me, and for the first time that night, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He realized that the woman standing before him was not the little girl he used to take fishing with her father. He saw the steel that Marcus Halloway had planted in my spine. "All right, Amara," he said, tipping his hat. "I will file the report. The destruction of property is on record. Get that court order tomorrow and call me." I watched the cruiser pull away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood alone in the driveway for one last minute. Carter was visible through the sheer curtains of the drawing room, laughing with his head thrown back. He thought he had used the law to trap me. He thought the squatter's rights loophole was his ace in the hole. He did not realize that by claiming residency, he had just accepted liability for every single thing that happened in that house. Every scratch on the floor was now his debt. Every broken chair was his bill. By fighting to stay, he had walked voluntarily into a financial bear trap. I turned and walked to my car. I did not look back again. I did not need to. I had a busy night ahead of me. I had to draft affidavits. I had to compile the security footage. I had to prepare the foreclosure documents that my bank holding company technically had the right to execute upon breach of contract. As I started the engine, I felt a deep, satisfying peace. My mother wanted a war. Carter wanted a legal battle. Dominique wanted a show. I would give them all of it. I drove away from the estate, leaving them to their celebration. "Enjoy the champagne, Mother," I thought as I turned onto the main road. "It is going to be the most expensive drink you have ever had." The coffee shop I chose was small and dimly lit, located 3 blocks past the edge of the gentrified district where my family refused to set foot. It was the kind of place where people went to be invisible, and right now invisibility was my greatest weapon. I sat in a booth at the back, my hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of black tea, watching the rain streak against the window. Across from me sat Vance, a private investigator who had worked with my father's legal team for a decade. He was a man who traded in secrets, and looking at the thick manila envelope resting under his hand, I knew he had brought me a heavy one. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He slid the envelope across the scratched formica table. "It is worse than we thought, Amara," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "Your brother-in-law is not just a liar. He's a drowning man looking for a life raft, and he has decided that your family estate is the only thing that can keep him afloat." I opened the envelope. The first thing I saw was a photograph of Carter, not in a boardroom, but at a high-stakes poker table in Atlantic City. His tie was loosened, his eyes were manic, and there was a desperate sheen of sweat on his forehead. "He tells everyone he is a hedge fund manager," Vance continued, pointing to a stack of bank statements. "But the truth is, he has not held a valid trading license in 4 years. He was fired from his last firm for misappropriating client funds. They did not prosecute because they wanted to avoid a scandal, so they let him resign quietly. He has been unemployed ever since." I flipped through the pages. The numbers were staggering. There were withdrawals of $50,000, then $100,000. There were wire transfers to offshore accounts that looked incredibly suspicious. "Where is the money coming from?" I asked. "If he is unemployed, how is he funding this lifestyle?" "He is not funding it," Vance said, leaning in. "He is borrowing it. He has maxed out every credit card. He has taken out personal loans from every bank that would talk to him. And when the banks cut him off, he turned to the unregulated market." I froze, my finger resting on a printout of a crypto exchange account. The balance was in the red, deep in the red. "He bet big on cryptocurrency futures," Vance explained. "He thought he was smarter than the market. He leveraged everything he had, and then he leveraged money he did not have. When the market dipped last month, he lost everything. He is currently sitting on $8 million in debt, Amara. And a significant portion of that is owed to private lenders who do not use collection agencies. They use baseball bats." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was not just about greed anymore. This was about survival. Carter was not trying to steal the house because he wanted a vacation home. He was trying to steal it because he had a death mark on his head. "He needs the deed," Vance said, confirming my fears. "He needs an asset to collateralize. He plans to mortgage the estate the second he gets the title. He will take the cash pay off the sharks and leave your sister and mother with a foreclosure notice in 6 months. He is going to burn them, Amara. He is going to use them as human shields." I looked at the photo of Carter again. I used to think his arrogance came from success. Now I realized it was a mask for terror. He was a desperate animal, cornered and dangerous. But he had made one critical mistake. He thought I was just a hurdle to jump over. He did not know that I now held the map to his entire house of cards, and I was about to pull the bottom card out. Vance turned the page of the dossier, revealing a spreadsheet that looked more like a countdown to a funeral than a financial ledger. He tapped the bottom line with a thick finger. $8 million, Amara. That is the principal plus interest. And the interest is compounding daily at a rate that is illegal in 49 states. The people he borrowed from do not send demand letters. They send guys with tire irons. I stared at the number. It was staggering. Carter had managed to blow through a fortune that did not exist, betting on digital coins that had no physical value. He had built a mountain of debt so high it was casting a shadow over my entire family. "He has 72 hours, Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "My contacts on the street say the deadline is Friday at midnight. If he does not have the cash or a verified asset to secure a new loan, by then he is not just going to be bankrupt. He is going to disappear. We are talking about the kind of people who solve problems with concrete and the Hudson River." Everything suddenly clicked into place. The desperation in Carter's eyes. The frantic way he had tried to bully me into signing the deed at the funeral. The break-in. He did not want the house because he loved the architecture. He did not want to live there with Dominique and raise a family. He looked at Halloway Manor and he did not see a home. He saw a giant ATM machine. "He needs the deed to secure a bridge loan," I said, realizing the mechanics of his plan. Exactly, Vance nodded. The estate is appraised at 9.9 million. If he gets the title in his name, or in Dominique's name, he can walk into a predatory lender tomorrow and walk out with a check for 8 million against the equity of the house. He will pay off the sharks and save his own skin. And what happens to the house, I asked, knowing the answer. Vance shrugged. The predatory lender will foreclose in 6 months when Carter fails to make the payments. The bank takes the house. Your mother and sister get evicted. And Carter walks away debt-free, leaving the wreckage of your father's legacy behind him. He is planning to use your inheritance as a human shield, Amara. He is literally trading your family home for his life. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. It was one thing to be greedy. It was another thing entirely to be a coward. Carter was willing to render his pregnant wife and his elderly mother-in-law homeless just to cover his own gambling mistakes. He was willing to burn down my father's memory to keep himself warm. Does Dominique know? I asked, looking at the grainy photos of Carter shaking hands with men who looked like they broke fingers for a living. Vance shook his head. No. She thinks he is a genius investor who just hit a rough patch. She thinks the house is going to be her ticket to high society. She has no idea that he has already mentally liquidated it. She is planning a nursery, and he is planning an escape route. I closed the file. The image of Carter sitting in my father's chair, drinking his wine and laughing with his feet on the desk, burned in my mind. He was celebrating because he thought he had found a lifeline. He thought he had bullied the stupid little sister into submission. He had no idea that the stupid little sister was the only thing standing between him and a very violent end. Can I keep this file? I asked. Vance slid it across the table. It is all yours. Use it wisely. I stood up, clutching the envelope. I was not just going to use it. I was going to detonate it. Carter wanted a deadline. He wanted to play high stakes. Well, I was about to call his bluff. He had 72 hours to pay his debts. I had less than 24 hours to make sure he did not pay them with my money. I walked out of the coffee shop into the rain. The time for mercy was over. It was time to let the sharks feed. Back in the solitude of my temporary motel room, I opened my laptop and put on my noise-canceling headphones. When I had upgraded the security system at Halloway Manor 2 years ago, I had not just installed cameras. I had installed high-fidelity audio sensors in the primary gathering rooms. I did it originally to monitor the humidity levels for the antique furniture preservation, but tonight, those sensors were about to preserve something far more valuable: the truth. On the screen, I saw Carter pacing in my father's study. He was alone. The door was closed and locked. He had a glass of whiskey in one hand and his cell phone in the other. He looked agitated. He dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. I turned up the volume until his breathing sounded like it was right next to me. "Hey, baby," he said, his voice dropping an octave into a tone I had never heard him use with my sister. It was smooth, almost seductive, but edged with panic. I know I promised I would be there by now. But there has been a complication." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. I typed a command into my laptop, starting a secure recording. "Don't be like that, Jessica," he said. "You know I am doing this for us. I just need a few more days. The old man kicked the bucket finally, so the path is clear. I just have to deal with the family." I watched him take a swig of whiskey and wipe his mouth. "God, you have no idea what I am dealing with here," he continued, his voice dripping with venom. "It is a circus. You should see them. They are walking around like they are royalty, but they are just trash wrapped in designer labels." My stomach churned. He was talking about the family he had married into, the family that had welcomed him. And the mother, Bernice Carter, laughed a cruel, ugly sound. "She is the worst of them all. She is a stupid, senile old black woman who thinks she is the Queen of Sheba. She is so desperate for a white son-in-law that I can tell her the sky is green, and she will thank me for the information. She is eating out of the palm of my hand, Jessica. I could sell her into slavery, and she would probably pack her own bags if I told her it was a vacation." I felt a cold rage stiffen my spine. My mother was difficult, She was cruel to me. But hearing this man, this outsider, speak about her with such racial contempt made me want to drive back there and strangle him. But I forced myself to keep listening. I needed more. What about the wife? The voice on the other end must have asked because Carter scoffed. Dominique! He sneered, looking at a photo of my sister on the desk. He reached out and knocked the frame face down. She is a cow. A useless, vain cow. She has spent the last 5 years spending money she does not have. She is past her prime anyway. Once I get the deed and mortgage the property, I am done with her. I will leave her with the debt and the foreclosure notice. She can go back to being a nobody. He walked over to the window, looking out at the grounds he planned to steal. Just 48 hours, baby, he promised. I get the deed. I get the loan. And then I am on a plane to Rio with you. We will be drinking margaritas while the bank comes to throw them out on the street. It is going to be hilarious. I pressed the stop button on the recording. My hands were trembling, not with fear, but with adrenaline. I had it. I had the smoking gun. He wasn't just a gambler, he was a predator. He was a racist con artist who had infiltrated my family to strip it for parts. He called my mother stupid. He called my sister a cow. He admitted to a conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud. I saved the file to 3 different cloud servers and a physical hard drive. Carter thought he was the puppet master. He thought he was playing a game of chess with pieces that couldn't think for themselves. He had no idea that the piece he had discarded, the quiet little furniture restorer, had just checkmated him from a motel room 3 miles away. I took off my headphones. The silence in the room was heavy, but my mind was screaming. It was time to introduce Carter to the consequences of his own voice. The meeting took place in the corner booth of a dimly lit hotel bar downtown. Carter had chosen the location. It was quiet, expensive, and intimate. When I walked in, he stood up. He had changed out of his party clothes into a tailored navy suit that fit him perfectly. He looked like every successful investment banker on a magazine cover. He flashed me a smile that was designed to disarm a smile that probably worked on boardroom executives and cocktail waitresses alike. But to me, it just looked like a baring of teeth. "You look tired, Amara," he said, pulling out my chair for me. He signaled the waitress without asking what I wanted. A Pinot Noir for the lady. The expensive stuff. And a double bourbon for me. He waited until the drinks arrived before he made his move. He leaned across the small table, invading my personal space. His hand brushed against mine on the tabletop, a calculated touch meant to simulate intimacy. "Listen," he said, his voice dropping to a velvet whisper. "I know things got heated at the house. I want to apologize for Bernice and Dominique. They are hysterical. They let their emotions rule them. You know how women in your family can get." I stared at him. He was trying to create a conspiracy of 2. He was trying to separate me from my gender and my race to make me feel like I was special, like I was the exception. It was a classic manipulation tactic. "I am not like them, Amara," he continued, his eyes locking onto mine. "And I know you are not either. You are different. You are quiet. You are observant. I have always admired that about you. You have a simple dignity that your sister lacks." He took a sip of his bourbon, watching me over the rim of the glass. "I want to help you," he said. "I really do. This legal battle, it is going to get ugly. Bernice is going to drag your name through the mud. She is going to attack your character, your mental health, everything. And honestly, Amara, you do not deserve that. You have a nice, simple life. You have your little workshop. You have your peace. Do you really want to trade that for years of litigation and stress?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table. "I have a proposition," he said, "a way out. I have spoken to some investors. I can offer you a cash settlement. If you sign the deed over to me quietly tonight, I will wire $500,000 into your account tomorrow morning." He sat back, looking at me with a benevolent expression, as if he were Santa Claus handing a starving child a gift. $500,000, Amara," he repeated, emphasizing the number slowly. "Think about what a girl like you could do with that kind of money. You could expand your workshop. You could buy a new truck. You could take a vacation. You could finally be comfortable. You would never have to worry about rent again. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was offering me $500,000 for an estate worth $10 million. He was offering me pennies on the dollar, and he expected me to be grateful. He expected me to be the poor, naive black girl who sees a check with 6 zeros and loses her mind. He spoke to me like I had never seen money before, like I did not understand the concept of value. It is a lot of money, he urged, seeing my silence as hesitation. More money than you have ever seen in your life, I bet. And all you have to do is sign one piece of paper. No lawyers, no fighting. Just you and me settling this like adults. He reached out and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm and damp. Let me take the burden of the estate off your shoulders, he said, his voice thick with false concern. You are not built for the stress of property management, Amara. It is a man's world. Let me handle the heavy lifting. You just take the cash and go enjoy your life. I looked down at the check. I looked at his hand covering mine. I thought about the $8 million debt hanging over his head. He did not have this money. He was offering me a bribe with funds he intended to steal from the house equity the moment I signed. He was trying to buy me with my own money. I gently pulled my hand away from his. I took a sip of the wine he had ordered. It was mediocre at best. That is a very generous offer, Carter. I said, my voice flat. He grinned, thinking he had won. I knew you were smart. But I have a question. I continued. If I sign this tonight, where does the money come from? I know you have been out of work for 4 years. His smile faltered. The charm cracked just for a second, revealing the panic underneath. His smile vanished like a light bulb burning out. The transition was instant and terrifying. He realized I knew he was broke. He realized I was not the naive little sister he could dazzle with a half-empty promise. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath that sounded like a tire losing air. He looked at me with eyes that were no longer human. They were the eyes of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. You are making a very dangerous mistake, Amara, he said, his voice devoid of the charm he had plastered on just seconds ago. You think you are playing a game of poker, but you do not even know what the stakes are. I offered you a carrot. I offered you a way out with dignity. But if you want the stick, I can give you the stick. He took a sip of his bourbon, his eyes never leaving mine. You know, Amara, people are worried about you. Bernice is worried. Dominique is worried. You have been acting very erratic since Marcus died. The outbursts at the funeral. The delusions of grandeur about owning the estate. The obsessive hoarding in that workshop of yours. It paints a picture of a woman having a severe nervous breakdown. I felt a cold stone drop in my stomach. I knew where he was going. He was gaslighting me, but he was doing it with a legal strategy in mind. I have a friend who is a psychiatrist at St. Jude's, he continued casually, twirling the ice in his glass. He owes me a favor. A big favor. He specializes in involuntary holds for patients who are a danger to themselves or others. All I need is one signature, Amara. One signature from a concerned family member stating that you are mentally unfit and you disappear. He leaned forward again, his face losing all pretense of civility. Imagine it. You wake up in a white room wearing a paper gown, no phone, no lawyer, no keys to your precious house, just you and your grief, and enough sedatives to keep you quiet for a very long time. And while you are drooling in a corner trying to remember your own name, I will be getting power of attorney over your assets. I will sell the house, I will spend the money, and you will be too medicated to even care. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not just a threat. This was a death sentence. He was talking about a conservatorship. He was talking about stripping me of my civil rights, using the immense power of the patriarchal medical system against a grieving black woman. He knew that women like me were often dismissed as angry or unstable. He knew exactly how to weaponize the system. Who are they going to believe, Amara? He whispered. The wealthy white investment banker and the grieving mother, or the hysterical daughter who thinks she owns a mansion on a repairman's salary. You are alone. You have always been alone. If you vanish, nobody is going to ask questions. They will just say, "Oh, poor Amara, she finally cracked." He slid the paper toward me again using one finger. This is not a negotiation anymore. This is a rescue mission. Sign the deed and you walk out of here free and rich. Refuse and the next time you see a doctor, it will be the last person you see for a very long time. Do not test me, Amara. I am fighting for my life, which means I am willing to take yours. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at him. I saw the desperation behind the cruelty. He was terrified. He was like a cornered rat baring its teeth. But a cornered rat is the most dangerous animal in the world. I realized then that if I walked out of this bar without signing, I needed to watch my back every second of every day. He had just escalated this from a property dispute to a battle for my physical freedom. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back my rage. I needed to buy time. I needed to get out of that booth before he made a call that I could not disconnect. The notification lit up my phone screen like a warning flare in the dark. It was a live stream from Dominique's Instagram account. I tapped the screen and there she was standing in the center of the grand foyer of Halloway Manor. She was wearing a white silk gown that I knew for a fact she had charged to a credit card that was already over its limit. She was spinning around holding a glass of champagne, her face flushed with the manic energy of someone who is running out of time but refuses to look at the clock. "We are so excited to announce the first annual Halloway Legacy Gala," she chirped into the camera, her voice high and breathless. "This Saturday night we are opening our doors to the elite of the city. We are celebrating the new ownership and the bright future of this estate. It is going to be the event of the season. Senators are coming. Investors are coming. It is going to be magical." I watched as she panned the camera around, showing florists bringing in massive arrangements of white lilies and caterers setting up round tables in the ballroom. She was not just throwing a party. She was staging a coronation. She was inviting the entire social register of the city to witness her ascent to the throne. She wanted to cement her status as the lady of the manor before anyone could ask to see the deed. I closed the app and sat back in the worn chair of my motel room. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. Carter had threatened to lock me away in a mental institution because he needed silence. He needed to do his dirty dealings in the dark. But Dominique, in her infinite vanity, had decided to turn on every spotlight she could find. She was building a stage. She was gathering an audience. She was doing all the hard work for me. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Dominique. "Do not even think about crashing the party. This is for A-listers only. If you want to come, you can stand by the service entrance and help the staff park cars. That is about your speed." I stared at the message. She thought she was insulting me. She thought she was putting me in my place. She had no idea that she had just handed me the weapon that would end her. If I exposed them in private, they could lie. They could spin the story. They could use Carter's connections to bury the truth. But in front of 200 witnesses, in front of the press, in front of the very investors, Carter was trying to defraud. There would be no spinning that. I typed back a simple response. "Have a wonderful night. I will be watching." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. The pieces were all there. I had the deed proving I owned the house. I had the financial records proving Carter was a fraud. I had the audio recording of him abusing my family. And now, thanks to my sister, I had a venue. She wanted a spectacle. She wanted a night that no one would ever forget. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. I was going to turn her gala into a public execution of their reputation. I would let them put on their gowns and their tuxedos. I would let them drink their expensive wine and make their speeches. And when they were at the very height of their arrogance, when they felt untouchable, that is when I would pull the floor out from under them. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The scared daughter was gone. The victim was gone. I was the director now. And Saturday night would be the final act. Dominique wanted to be the star of the show. Fine. I would let her be the star of a tragedy. The night of the gala Halloway Manor did not look like a house that was drowning in debt. It looked like a palace. Floodlights bathed the limestone facade in a warm golden glow, erasing the shadows where the cracks in the foundation were beginning to show. A line of black limousines snaked down the long driveway, delivering the city's elite to the front steps. Valets in crisp white jackets moved with military precision, parking Bentleys and Rolls-Royces on the very gravel where my mother had thrown my suitcase just days before. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the heavy floral aroma of thousands of white lilies that had been trucked in that morning. It was a masterclass in illusion. Bernice and Dominique stood at the massive double doors, greeting their guests with the gracious benevolence of royalty. My mother wore a floor-length gown of emerald silk that struggled to contain her frame, and around her neck hung a necklace of diamonds and emeralds that caught the light with every breath she took. To the untrained eye, it was a family heirloom. But I knew the truth. It was a rental. She had borrowed it from a jeweler downtown, promising him exposure in the society pages in exchange for the loan. She was literally wearing borrowed time. She laughed and clasped the hands of the senator's wife, playing the role of the grieving yet resilient widow to perfection. Beside her, Dominique was a vision in shimmering silver. She had hired a stylist, a makeup artist, and a hair team to construct her image for the evening. She posed for the photographers from the local papers, tilting her head just so to catch the best light. She introduced herself to everyone as the new mistress of Halloway Manor, her voice dripping with a faux humility that made my stomach turn. She accepted compliments on the house as if she had laid the bricks herself, completely ignoring the fact that she could not even afford the electricity bill to keep the chandelier above her head burning. And then there was Carter. He moved through the crowd like a shark in a tank of tropical fish. He looked impeccable in a bespoke tuxedo, his hair slicked back, his smile dazzling and predatory. He was not just hosting a party, he was working a room. I watched on the security feed as he cornered a banker near the ice sculpture, placing a hand on the man's shoulder and leaning in close. I knew exactly what he was saying. He was spinning tales of investment opportunities of equity and leverage. He was trying to secure that bridge loan before the clock struck midnight. He played the part of the grieving son-in-law and the savvy financial genius, simultaneously shifting masks, depending on who he was talking to. The ballroom was packed with the kind of people who could make or break a reputation with a whisper. There were real estate moguls, tech CEOs, and old money matriarchs who had known my father for decades. They drank champagne that Carter had bought on credit and ate canapés off silver trays that belonged to me. They admired the art on the walls, not knowing it was about to be seized. The atmosphere was electric with the buzz of wealth and power. It was the perfect peak. They were standing on top of the world, convinced that they had pulled off the greatest heist of their lives. They had the applause. They had the envy of their peers. They had everything they ever wanted. And they had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their feet was made of trapdoors that I was about to open. The orchestra was playing a waltz when I arrived. I stepped out of the back of a town car that I owned, not one that I had rented. I did not walk to the service entrance as my sister had suggested. I walked straight up the center of the red carpet. The photographers who had been bored with the steady stream of black tuxedos suddenly sprung to life. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks, blinding in their intensity. They did not know who I was yet, but they knew they were looking at someone important. I was not wearing the sawdust-covered overalls that my family associated me with. I was not wearing the sensible gray suit I had worn to the lawyer's office. I was wearing a gown of deep midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was structural and modern, with a neckline that plunged in a sharp V and a train that flowed behind me like a river of ink. It was not a dress meant to be worn by a guest. It was a dress meant to be worn by an owner. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, and around my neck was a single flawless diamond pendant that had belonged to my grandmother. It was the only piece of real jewelry in the entire house that night. Two large security guards in ill-fitting suits hired by Carter for the night stepped forward to block my path at the door. They looked at me with the suspicion they reserved for anyone who didn't look like they belonged on the A list. "Invitation, ma'am," one of them grunted, holding up a hand. I did not stop walking. I did not even slow down. I reached into my clutch and pulled out not a paper invitation, but a small black leather wallet. I flipped it open, revealing a gold badge, State Department Diplomatic Security. I said, my voice low and even, "I am here on official business. Step aside." The lie was smooth and effortless. The guards looked at the badge, then at my dress, then at each other. They were paid to stop gatecrashers, not international incidents. They hesitated just for a second, but a second was all I needed. Behind them, I saw my own private security team. I had hired them that morning. 4 men in impeccable black suits wearing earpieces moved out of the shadows of the foyer. Their leader, a man I knew only as stone, met my eyes and gave a barely perceptible nod. They had quietly taken up positions at every exit and every strategic point in the ballroom. Carter's rental guards were outnumbered and outclassed, and they didn't even know it. The 2 guards at the door stepped aside, their confusion evident. I walked past them, the velvet of my dress brushing against their cheap suits. I stepped into the foyer, the same foyer I had been thrown out of just nights before. The air inside was warm and smelled of expensive lilies and desperation. The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor cut through the chatter. I stopped at the top of the small staircase that led down into the ballroom. Below me, 200 faces turned to look. The music faded. The laughter died. For a moment, there was only silence as the entire room took in the woman standing above them. I looked for my mother. I looked for my sister. And finally, I locked eyes with Carter across the room. He dropped his champagne glass. The sound of shattering crystal was the signal that the real show was about to begin. The spotlight cut through the dim ballroom, finding Carter and Dominique standing on the raised dais like a king and queen addressing their subjects. Carter tapped the microphone, sending a sharp feedback whine through the speakers that silenced the last murmurs of the crowd. He wrapped his arm around Dominique's waist, pulling her close in a display of marital solidarity that I knew was as hollow as his bank account. He looked out at the sea of faces, his smile tight and practiced. "Thank you all for coming," Carter said, his voice rich with practiced emotion. "Tonight is about honoring a giant. Marcus Halloway was more than a father-in-law to me. He was a mentor. He was a visionary. And though he is gone, we are committed to continuing his work." Dominique dabbed at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief, acting the part of the grieving daughter perfectly. Carter squeezed her shoulder and continued. "That is why we have made the difficult decision to auction Halloway Manor. We are not doing this for ourselves. We are selling this estate to launch the Marcus Halloway Global Foundation. We believe the proceeds from this house should serve the world, not just one family. It is what Marcus would have wanted." The crowd applauded politely, murmuring their approval of such selfless generosity. They had no idea the charity was a lie to pay off a gambling debt. Carter raised a hand for silence, his expression shifting to one of somber pity. However, he said, his voice dropping to a hush. "We also have a personal request. We ask for your prayers for our beloved sister Amara. As many of you know, she has struggled with significant mental health challenges since her father's passing. She is confused and often delusional, claiming things that simply are not true. We are doing everything we can to get her the professional help she needs, even if she resists our love. It is a tragedy, but we will care for her no matter what." Dominique nodded, looking tragically beautiful. "We love you, Amara," she whispered into the mic, performing for the cameras. "We just want you to get well." I stood in the shadows, watching them weaponize their pity. They were inoculating the crowd against the truth. They were telling the world I was crazy so that when I spoke, nobody would believe me. It was a brilliant strategy. Unfortunately for them, I had not come to speak. I had come to show. The applause for their fake charity was still rippling through the room when I began to move. I did not run. I walked with the deliberate momentum of a tsunami. My heels struck the wooden floor with a rhythm that cut through the polite clapping. People turned to look parting like the Red Sea as I approached the stage. Carter saw me first. His smile faltered, his eyes widening in panic. He signaled to the security guards, but Stone and his team had already intercepted them, blocking their path with silent, intimidating efficiency. I walked up the stairs to the dais. Dominique took a step back, clutching her pearls, looking like a deer in headlights. Carter tried to block the microphone, his hand reaching out to grab my arm. "Amara," he hissed through his teeth. "Don't make a scene. You are embarrassing yourself." I didn't even look at him. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand with a grip of iron. I didn't pull it away violently. I took it with such absolute authority that he simply let go. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice booming through the sound system clear and steady. I hate to interrupt such a touching performance, but there seems to be a slight factual error in tonight's presentation. I pulled a HDMI cable from the podium's console and plugged it into my phone. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying a photo of my father, flickered and changed. A gasp went through the room. Displayed on the screen in high definition was a legal document. It was a deed of sale dated 5 years ago. It was notarized, stamped, and signed by the bank. "As you can see," I said, gesturing to the screen, "this estate does not belong to the estate of Marcus Halloway. It was purchased out of foreclosure 5 years ago. By me, Amara Halloway." The room fell into a stunned silence. I zoomed in on the signature line on the screen. There it was. My name. Clear as day. So when my brother-in-law talks about selling this house for charity, I continued, turning to look at Carter, whose face had gone pale as a sheet. "I am curious. How exactly do you plan to sell a house that you do not own, Carter? Is that not what the law calls fraud?" I did not wait for him to concoct a lie. I tapped the screen again, and the legal document disappeared, replaced by a simple audio waveform. The room went deadly quiet, confused by the jagged lines on the display. "I want you all to hear exactly what this man thinks of the family he claims to love," I said calmly. I pressed play. Carter's voice boomed through the high-quality speakers, loud and distorted, but undeniably him. The clarity was devastating. "She is a stupid, senile old black woman," the recording played, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "She is so desperate for a white son-in-law, I could sell her into slavery and she would thank me. And Dominique, she is a cow. A useless, vain cow. I will leave her with the debt and the foreclosure notice." A collective gasp ripped through the room. I watched my mother Bernice freeze, her hand flying to her throat as if she had been physically struck. Dominique took a stumbling step back away from Carter, looking at him with horror dawning in her eyes. Carter stood paralyzed, his face draining of all color, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But I was not done yet. I swiped one last time. The screen changed to a collage of red and black documents. These were not polite bank letters. These were final notices from illegal lending syndicates. $8 million, I announced, pointing to the staggering figure highlighted in yellow. "That is what your genius investor actually owes. He is not a hedge fund manager. He is a failed gambler who is days away from having his legs broken by loan sharks." I turned to the crowd, looking directly at the investors Carter had been schmoozing earlier. "He did not invite you here to donate to a foundation. He invited you here to help him commit mortgage fraud. He planned to use the deed to this house to secure a loan to save his own life and then leave my mother and sister homeless when the bank came to collect." I turned back to Carter, who was now shaking violently. "So tell me, Carter," I asked, my voice slicing through the air, "were you planning to sell my house to pay for your gambling debts, or were you just going to let the mafia take it?" The silence in the ballroom was broken not by applause, but by the heavy thud of the service doors swinging open. I looked toward the back of the room and pointed. Carter followed my gaze, and the color drained from his face completely. Standing there were three men who definitely did not have invitations. They wore heavy leather jackets, and their eyes scanned the room with predatory focus until they landed on him. I had sent them an anonymous tip about his location an hour ago. Carter took a step back, knocking over the podium, but before he could run, the main doors burst open. This time it was not private security. It was the Economic Crimes Division. Officers in tactical vests swarmed the room, their voices barking orders that cut through the polite society atmosphere like a knife. Carter Wilson, a detective, shouted, holding up a warrant. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and grand larceny." Carter tried to scramble off the stage, but he tripped over the train of Dominique's dress. The officers were on him in seconds, pinning him to the floor right in front of the investors he had tried to swindle. As the handcuffs clicked shut, the sound echoed like a gunshot. Dominique let out a wail that was pure animalistic grief. Her knees gave out and she collapsed onto the stage, her silver dress tearing audibly as she fell. She sat there amidst the tangle of microphone cables, sobbing into her hands, her perfect makeup streaming down her face in ugly black streaks. She looked like a broken doll thrown into the dirt. And Bernice. My mother stood frozen in the center of the chaos. She did not move. She did not speak. She just stared at the screen where her son-in-law's voice was still looping on the display, calling her a stupid old woman. The grand illusion of the Halloway dynasty had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million jagged pieces, and she was standing in the wreckage realizing she was the one who had invited the demolition crew. I unplugged the phone from the screen and walked down the stairs, leaving them to the justice I had served. The fluorescent lights of the precinct were a harsh change from the soft golden glow of the ballroom. I stood on the other side of the observation glass watching the end of the Halloway dynasty. Bernice and Dominique sat on bolted metal benches huddled together like frightened children. The emerald silk gown my mother had worn with such pride was now wrinkled and stained with sweat. Dominique was shivering, her silver dress looking ridiculous under the glare of the interrogation room lights. They were no longer the queens of society. They were just two women who had signed too many papers without reading them. Detective Wilson was not being gentle. I could hear his muffled voice through the glass asking them about the wire transfers and the credit cards opened in their names. He was treating them as accomplices. In the eyes of the law, ignorance was not a defense, especially when that ignorance was funded by stolen money. They had lived on the proceeds of fraud for years, and now the bill had come due. When they finally saw me standing in the hallway, their faces crumbled. Bernice rushed to the glass, her hands pressing against the smudge marks. "Amara," she wept, her voice cracking with desperation. "You have to get us out of here. Please, they think we helped him. They think we knew. You have money, Amara. We saw the deed. You have millions. Pay the bail. We are your family." Dominique joined her, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "I cannot go to jail, Amara. I am pregnant. Please, just tell them it was a mistake. Tell them we are victims too." I looked at them banging on the glass. They were finally begging, but they were not begging for forgiveness. They were begging for a check. They still thought my purpose on this earth was to clean up their messes. They thought that because I had money, I was obligated to save them from the consequences of their own greed. I watched them plead, and realized that even in handcuffs, they had not changed. They were sorry they got caught, not sorry for what they had done. I placed my hand against the cold glass, separating my freedom from her incarceration. Bernice saw the gesture and pressed her own palm against it, thinking it was a sign of reconciliation. Her eyes lit up with a desperate hope. She leaned close to the mesh speaker, her voice trembling with the manipulation tactics she had perfected over a lifetime. "Amara, please," she implored. "We are blood. I am your mother. I carried you. I raised you. You cannot leave me in here with these people. We are Halloways. We stick together against the world. That is the rule. Carter fooled us all, but we are still family. Write the check, Amara. Be the bigger person. Do it for your father's memory." I listened to her invoke my father's name, the man she had driven into bankruptcy, and I felt the last thread of attachment snap. It was a clean break. "You are right, Bernice," I said, my voice calm and devoid of anger. "You did make a choice, but you did not choose family. You chose an image. You looked at a con artist with the right skin color and the right suit, and you decided he was worth more than your own daughter. You let him insult me. You let him steal from me. You let him call you a stupid old woman, and you smiled because he was the white son-in-law you always wanted to show off at the country club." Her mouth fell open, the color draining from her face as the brutal truth hit her. "You wanted him to lead this family?" I continued, backing away from the glass. "You gave him the keys to the kingdom. So now that the kingdom is burning, you should ask him to put out the fire. Do not ask me for bail money, Bernice. Ask Carter. I am sure he can get you a great deal on a lawyer from his prison cell." I turned my back on her for the last time. I heard her screaming my name, banging her fists against the glass, but the sound was muffled and distant. It sounded like a ghost from a past I no longer lived in. I walked out of the station and into the cool night air, taking the first breath of my real life. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they ground my family into dust. Carter did not get the plea deal he was banking on. The federal judge saw right through his charm and sentenced him to 10 years in a maximum security penitentiary for wire fraud and identity theft. The man who drank vintage Bordeaux and smoked Cuban cigars is now eating lukewarm cafeteria mash in a cell he shares with a stranger. He spends his days writing letters to appeals courts that will never read them, fading into the anonymity of the penal system. Dominique fared no better. When the scandal broke, the luxury brands she had partnered with did not just drop her, they sued her for damages to their reputation. She filed for bankruptcy 3 months later, losing every designer bag and shoe she had ever flaunted. I saw her recently at a discount grocery store on the edge of town. She was wearing a polyester vest and a name tag that was crooked. She was scanning a bag of frozen peas for a customer who was yelling at her about a coupon. She looked down, hoping I would not recognize her without her ring lights and filters. She is not an influencer anymore. She is just a woman trying to pay for a studio apartment she can barely afford. But the cruelest fate was reserved for my mother. With the estate secured in my name and her personal accounts drained by Carter's schemes, she was left destitute. There were no wealthy friends left to take her in. She currently resides in a state-subsidized nursing home 2 counties over. It is a gray concrete building that smells of antiseptic and boiled vegetables. She shares a room with 2 other women and sleeps on a mattress that is as hard as the floor. She spends her days sitting by a window that overlooks a parking lot, waiting for a son-in-law who is in prison, and a daughter who cannot afford the bus fare to visit. The Halloway name means nothing in there. She is just another lonely old woman who bet on the wrong horse and lost everything. The silence in Halloway Manor was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was not the heavy silence of a tomb, but the clean, crisp silence of a fresh start. I stood in the center of the great hall watching the dust motes dance in the sunlight. The party was over. The guests were gone. The parasites had been removed. I had hired a team of industrial cleaners to go through every square inch of the estate. I told them I wanted a deep clean, but in reality I wanted an exorcism. I watched them steam the carpets where Carter had spilled his wine. I watched them scrub the walls where Dominique had leaned while taking her vanity selfies. I ordered them to throw away the silk drapes that held the stale scent of my mother's perfume. Every wipe of a sponge felt like it was erasing a bad memory. Every trash bag that went out the door took a piece of their toxicity with it. I wanted to scour the very DNA of the house until the stench of their betrayal was completely gone. I wanted to bleach the greed out of the floorboards. When the crew finally left, the house smelled of lemon zest and sage. It smelled sterile and new. I walked through the empty rooms, my bare feet touching the cool wood. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like a guest in my own home. I did not feel like the unwanted daughter hiding in the workshop. I felt like the owner. The space was vast, but it was no longer heavy. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The weeds would need to be pulled and the broken furniture replaced, but that was fine. I had time. I had resources. And most importantly, I had peace. The house was finally mine. I sat at the heavy mahogany desk where my father had once managed his empire, and where Carter had nearly destroyed it. The surface was clear now. It was clear. No wine stains, no gambling slips, just a stack of legal documents that would define the true future of the Halloway legacy. I uncapped my fountain pen, and the ink flowed smooth and black against the crisp white paper. With every signature, I was not just reclaiming the house, I was repurposing it. I was signing into existence the Marcus Halloway Center for African American Heritage Conservation. This estate would no longer be a mausoleum for one family's ego. It would be a sanctuary for history. The East Wing, where Dominique had planned to film her makeup tutorials, would now be a state-of-the-art restoration lab, teaching young artisans how to preserve the artifacts of our ancestors. The ballroom where Carter had been arrested would host galas that actually funded scholarships for history students, not gambling debts. I was turning the symbol of my family's wealth into a tool for my community's enrichment. A few weeks later, a heavy package arrived in the mail. Inside was the latest issue of Forbes magazine. I stared at the cover and felt a lump form in my throat. It was not a picture of a socialite in a rented dress trying to look important. It was a picture of me standing in my workshop, wearing my leather apron holding a chisel. The headline read, "The Architect of History." They called me a visionary. They praised my business acumen for turning a dormant asset into a cultural landmark. My mother and sister had spent their entire lives desperate to get into these pages. They thought fame came from wearing the right clothes and knowing the right people. They never understood that true recognition comes from building something that actually matters. I placed the magazine on the desk next to a photo of my father. I had not just saved his house. I had built the legacy he always deserved. I used to stand in the shadow of this house and wonder why I was not enough. I wondered why my restoration work was seen as manual labor, while my sister's vanity was seen as a career. I wondered why my quiet devotion to my father was ignored, while my brother-in-law's loud lies were celebrated. I spent years trying to buy their love with my silence. I thought that if I just made myself smaller, if I just took up less space, they would finally see me. I thought that family meant unconditional loyalty, even when that loyalty was being weaponized against me. But standing here today in the sunlight of a room I reclaimed, I realized that I was asking the wrong questions. It was never about whether I was enough for them. It was about whether they were enough for me. We are taught from a young age that blood is the strongest bond in the world. We are told that you cannot choose your family, and therefore you must endure them. We are told to forgive the abuse, to ignore the theft, and to smile at the insults because that is what good daughters do. That is a lie. I learned the hard way that shared DNA is not a license for abuse. It is merely a biological coincidence. True family is not defined by who you are related to at birth. True family is defined by respect. It is defined by the people who stand by you when the music stops and the money runs out. It is the people who value your soul, not your bank account. There is a medical term for tissue that has died and become infected. It is called necrosis. If you leave it alone, it does not heal. It spreads. It poisons the healthy tissue around it until the whole body shuts down. The only cure is amputation. You have to cut it off. It is painful and it leaves a scar, but it is the only way to survive. My mother and my sister were the necrosis in my life. I loved them, but they were rotting my spirit. Cutting them out was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was also the moment I started to heal. Do not let anyone tell you that you have to stay in a toxic situation just because of history. Do not let guilt hold you hostage. Your dignity is worth more than their approval. Your peace is worth more than their inheritance. I am no longer Amara the invisible sister. I am Amara the architect of my own life. I built this piece brick by brick and I will not let anyone tear it down again. If you are holding onto a rope that burns your hands, let it go. You might be surprised at how much higher you can reach when your hands are finally free. The story of Amara Halloway teaches us a profound lesson about the difference between price and value. Her family chased the appearance of wealth and status, losing their morality in the process, while Amara focused on preservation, hard work, and truth. We learn that toxic loyalty is a trap that can bankrupt us emotionally and financially. The most important takeaway is that setting boundaries is an act of self-preservation. We must have the courage to protect our peace and our legacy, even if it means walking away from the people who are supposed to love us the most. If you found strength in Amara's journey, take a moment to look at the circle of people around you. Are they feeding your spirit, or are they draining it? Remember that you have the power to write your own ending. Do not be afraid to close the door on the past so you can open a new one for your future. You deserve a life that honors your worth.